LadeMD.org.
State Circle is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you.
This is a bipartisan issue that nearly everyone agreed on, and they're trying to reverse it, and it's wrong.
I don't believe we need a referendum on it.
Lawmakers vote to reverse a Hogan executive order.
It's necessary to drive a market shift.
The fight over styrofoam.
This proposal is a sham.
And is it closing time for part of the comptroller's office?
Connecting Marylanders to their government. This is State Circle.
Good evening. The big story around State Circle this week is the first big partisan battle this year. Senate Democrats voting to reverse Governor Hogan's move to start schools after Labor Day. Nancy Amata covered the debate.
Regardless of what action the legislature attempts to take, they will fail.
Despite those words, lawmakers in the Senate voted 32-14 along party lines to preliminarily approve a bill which would allow local school boards to decide when their students go back to school. The move comes 2 years after Governor Hogan issued an executive order requiring classes to start after Labor Day. And by law, they must get 180 days and 1,080 hours of instruction in before the end of the year.
A lot of boards of education superintendents across the state have told us that the 180-day minimum, which was a floor, has almost become a ceiling, and they've lost their flexibility to address local concerns.
Senator Paul Pinsky, who's sponsoring the legislation, took to the Senate floor saying that local school boards are having a hard time squeezing in teacher development days, spring break, and religious holidays when they start after Labor Day.
Prior to 2.5 years ago, each local board decided what was best for their community, how many days were needed, how to schedule the calendar.
His bill, he points out,
doesn't set a start date. If they want to start on August 25th or after Labor Day or whenever, it leaves it up to the community and the Board of Education.
The governor and opponents of the bill say the later start date is good for families, saves on school air conditioning costs, and benefits the tourism industry.
When you probe and you talk to your constituents about this, they're looking for that consistency on the front end, but they appear to be more flexible on the back end.
The governor's directive to start after Labor Day never said you can't extend beyond June 15th or whatever to include those holidays.
A Goucher College poll from 2016 suggests 72% of Marylanders support a later school start date. That's why the governor says he plans to fight back with a referendum.
This is a bipartisan issue that nearly everyone agreed on, and they're trying to reverse it, and it's wrong. And so I'm going to stand up for the people.
The governor doesn't like to lose. None of us do. And this is one that I do think was not the best decision that he's made. So I don't believe we need a referendum on it.
After listening to nearly 2 hours of debate and 4 failed amendments, Senator Dolores Kelly wants lawmakers to remember.
So it's really not about whether we start before or after. It's do we believe in local control of the most basic service that we provide, public education.
I'm Nancy Yamada for State Circle.
Styrofoam cups are often used for hot drinks, and they are often seen floating out in the Chesapeake Bay. Delegate Brooke Learman is pushing for a third year for a statewide ban. She noted a number of jurisdictions have already acted to ban the product.
This bill is important, though, because it's necessary to drive a market shift. Competitively priced items already exist and are available, but if other jurisdictions are any indication of how powerful a prohibition on this type of product can be, then the prices of other products go down precipitously after this bill is implemented.
Business groups say alternatives are less effective and more expensive. An intense political battle is unfolding between the state's popular comptroller and his many critics in the legislature. Proposed legislation would strip the comptroller's authority over alcohol, tobacco, and fuel sales and would limit campaign contributions from those groups.
What is this legislation motivated by? It's motivated by petty retaliation against me for being an advocate for craft beer, which is opposed by the big out-of-state corporate beer interests. This proposal is a sham. It will be enormously expensive to the taxpayers for no good reason, other than that it serves the interests of big oil and big tobacco.
Quite frankly, the legislature, in putting this bill forth, is interested in public health, public safety, and public welfare, and protecting the public. The comptroller's interested in protecting his own wallet, and that has been the $1 million in campaign contributions that he has solicited from the very industry that he is responsible for having oversight and enforcement.
The comptroller is a Democrat who often sides with Governor Hogan on the Board of Public Works. Bracing for the possibility of another government shutdown, Maryland lawmakers introduced legislation to improve the availability of unemployment benefits. Yolanda Vasquez has more.
I should say 129,000 federal workers. There were about 43,000 impacted specifically by the partial shutdown.
Senator Brian Feldman outlines the details of his new bill to the Senate Finance Committee, citing the need to change state law through the Federal Shutdown Paycheck Protection Act.
We have this bizarre anomaly that really, because of the length of the shutdown, had not been previously uncovered.
Feldman says the state paid unemployment insurance to furloughed workers who were not forced to go to work. But when it came to federal workers who were deemed essential, like TSA and air traffic controllers, they, however, did not meet the eligibility requirements.
All this bill's trying to do is push back and say that the two categories of federal workers should be treated the same, that if you're furloughed and you stay home, that shouldn't be treated differently than the folks who actually had to go to work.
This isn't the only emergency legislation being brought forth. Congressman Anthony Brown is putting forth his plea on a federal level. Last month, the U.S. Department of Labor reiterated their stance on payment or lack thereof for federal workers.
We did receive guidance during this last shutdown from USDOL to caution states that they would not reimburse us dollar for dollar for any payments we made to essential personnel or the administrative costs associated with it.
That prompted Governor Larry Hogan to send a letter to the U.S. Labor Secretary asking him to reverse course and assist with some financial relief.
Well, certainly we want to make sure that we can help the employees that were hurt as a result of the shutdown. But at the same time, when we get into making policy about this, it comes at a cost.
Senator Stephen Hershey worries there might be some exposure to the state's insurance trust fund, but agrees federal workers should not be penalized.
And believe me, I mean, that's the last thing that we think is that these individuals should be used as pawns in this political game that's being played down in Washington, D.C. We're absolutely against that.
There's also a stipulation in the bill that if the state does not get reimbursed by the federal government for whatever reason, Senate Bill 391 becomes null and void. Senator Dolores Kelly, who chairs the Finance Committee, supports the legislation but takes it a step further. She believes there could be potential litigation from states, especially if another government shutdown occurs next week. In Annapolis, I'm Yolanda Vasquez for State Circle.
The state's chief judge says the judiciary is modernizing the way the courts work. In the State of the Judiciary address, Judge Mary Ellen Barbera told lawmakers that a new electronic record system will be fully online in 2 years.
Since 2015, with your help, the judiciary has funded 4 additional self-help centers, phone and online chat services, and educational videos that provide to your constituents legal advice and information about civil matters in the district and circuit courts.
The chief judge said the judiciary has expanded help for people without legal representation. TV cameras currently banned from Maryland trial courts, but House Republicans are hoping to change that. Their change would only apply during sentencing proceedings. Republicans have been critical of what they see as lenient sentences.
Control works best.
Some might say that this wouldn't be fair to the victim, or it may endanger witnesses. But this legislation, like legislation that's been passed in other states, would allow the witness that may be fearful for their life to be protected. It does in no way put them in jeopardy. For the victim that we are here to represent in this, they have the ability to disallow cameras in the courtroom to protect them and their feelings and their family as well.
But I think we've made a decision across our society that transparency is good, openness is good, and the public should have access to things like this.
Opponents say the cameras are a distraction and can impact the right to a fair trial. Settlement talks are underway in a long-running legal case challenging the state's treatment of historically black colleges. Charles Robinson has this report.
The offer's been made, but we don't think the offer's acceptable. I mean, if you look at other states down south, they've gotten $600, $500, $700 million to offer $100 million over 10 years. At $10 million a year, you're not really trying to make a difference.
Governor Hogan offered the Legislative Black Caucus $100 million over 10 years to settle the lawsuit. Four of the state's historically black colleges and universities sued over funding. The schools are Morgan State, Coppin State, and Bowie State universities, and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore.
I think we need to at least get some equity. I mean, get at least what some of the other states are receiving. I think that what was suggested is certainly not enough for the HBCUs.
The suit began 13 years ago. A federal judge has already ruled the state's funding formulas for the schools perpetuated segregation. All parties have tried to negotiate a settlement. Fed up with the stalemate, the federal court has ordered all parties into arbitration. At a morning meeting with Governor Hogan, the Black Caucus says it's not interested in a backdoor deal.
We're watching this issue, that we're keeping the governor focused on ensuring that we settle this lawsuit in a way that's beneficial to all.
We're in mediation right now. There's a federal court case. Attorney General is representing the state. My desire is to resolve it. We do have offers on the table. We're hoping that both parties can reach agreement, but we're under court order to not discuss those mediations or those offers.
While the focus in Maryland will be on schools like Bowie State, all eyes will be headed towards Richmond. That's where the federal courts will decide the fate of Maryland's HBCUs. In Bowie, I'm Charles Robinson for State Circle.
Our newsmaker this week is Steve Hsu, the executive director of the Maryland Opioid Operational Command Center. Mr. Hsu, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
You were, in your last job, the Anne Arundel County executive. I'm wondering how much of what you saw in that job, firsthand experience with the opioid problem, informs what you do in this new position, and tell us about this job.
I came into office as county executive in late 2014, and that was just at the time when this crisis was really beginning to accelerate. We started to see rapid increases in the number of fatalities resulting from heroin overdoses and the emergence of these very frightening chemicals that are effectively synthetic opiates, synthetic heroines, things like fentanyl. These products are immensely powerful. They're very compact and easy to hide. They're very inexpensive, and they're very deadly. And as county executive, I dealt with this issue in a big way. I think Anne Arundel County has been at the forefront of combating this crisis, and I'm delighted that the governor has given me this opportunity to continue my public service in such an important area that's affecting so many of our citizens and their families.
In terms of the fatal overdose numbers that I've seen, 2018 was worse than 2017. 17 was worse than 16. Are you sure we're attacking this in the right way?
We're being very, very aggressive on every imaginable front. Education and prevention, enforcement, and rehabilitation and treatment. Those are the three pillars of our approach to this crisis on orders of the governor, who declared a public health emergency related to opiates back in early 2017. That was the same time he created my office, the Opioid Operational Command Center, which has been charged with leading the statewide response. We are employing best practices drawn from all over the country in every jurisdiction in Maryland to combat the crisis. But we face a daunting challenge with the emergence of synthetic opiates like fentanyl, as I mentioned earlier, because they are so incredibly deadly. In 2017, we experienced as Marylanders the first year where more than 2,000 of our friends and neighbors died from opiate overdoses. And based on the first 3 quarters of the year through September, it is highly likely that we will have a second year of more than 2,000 fatalities. The only good news is that the period of dramatic growth, which we experienced in 2016 in the number of fatalities, appears to have passed. In that year, in 2016, the number of fatalities increased by 70%. In 2017, and it appears in 2018, as we reach the end of our data collection, that we will have had 2 years in a row of less than 10% increases. So it's starting to plateau and starting to slow down, and we are determined to turn those numbers down and to end this suffering as fast as we possibly can.
When you were county executive, Anne Arundel County, the county is fairly diverse. I mean, you have rural areas, you have urban, suburban. I'm assuming you saw the problem everywhere, and is it that way on the state level as well?
You are quite right. In Anne Arundel County, our observation was that our urban, suburban, and rural areas were equally impacted, as were all categories of ethnicity and race, and socioeconomic status, and we are seeing exactly the same thing at the state level. Interestingly, 2 of the hardest hit jurisdictions in Maryland are Baltimore City and Allegheny County, the most urban and the most rural locations in our entire state. So this drug knows no boundaries. It doesn't care about your race. It doesn't care about your socioeconomic status or anything else. It will come for you. It will take your money. It will take your career. It will take your family, and it will take your life. And I just want your listeners to know that there is help. There's hope. You just have to ask for it. Dial 211 or call your local health department or your local county and say, I'm ready for help. You will get the help you need.
What happens at that point? Somebody makes the phone call. Are the resources available? We hear about, ongoing treatments of shortages of treatment slots, inpatient treatment. Where do we stand?
We have come a long way since Governor Hogan declared the emergency 2 years ago. The treatment system is dramatically increased. There are much more services available for people who want help. We're doing a much better job educating young people about the dangers of drugs, and in partnership with local law enforcement and our federal partners, we are seizing immense quantities of illegal narcotics. So we've come a long way. When somebody wants help, they can get it today. Years ago, you could wait a week, 2 weeks to get the help you need. Now the help is there when you need it, with very little delay, and we are trying to shorten those delays as much as we can.
What's the role for Narcan, the antidote to opioids? Somebody's watching, they maybe have somebody in the family who has a problem. Who ought to have this on hand?
Everybody. Everybody should have Narcan on hand. At this point, all 24 local jurisdictions in Maryland have universal availability of naloxone with their public safety personnel. Many jurisdictions are pushing it out even to the general public so that family members of people who are suffering from substance use disorder will have the drug on hand to save that person's, their loved one's life if there is an overdose. Naloxone, which is the general name for Narcan, which is a branded product that's like Kleenex, is not a cure. It will reverse the effects of an overdose, but it does not, in and of itself, put the person on the path to recovery. There's still another step. Once revived, the individual has to make the choice that they want to go into treatment. And unfortunately, all too often, the person who's been revived with naloxone chooses to continue using, which is why we're seeing more and more frequent flyers, people who are being administered naloxone time and time again. We have a handful of patients, sufferers here in the state of Maryland, who've actually been administered naloxone more than 7 or 8 times. And this is, of course, a game you can't play forever. You will not beat the odds forever. So anyone who who suffers from an overdose, just, interpret that message for what it is. It's a life-saving call. You've been given another chance. Call 211. Call the health department. Get into treatment. Don't risk another overdose. You might not be so lucky next time.
Steve Hsu, the executive director of the Maryland Opioid Operational Command Center, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jeff.
And this week, MPT is highlighting efforts to fight opioid abuse and other dependencies with a series of special programs. Tune in tomorrow night at 7:30 for Fighting Opioids Today, Maryland Communities. That's tomorrow on MPT. And we're back with the Political Roundtable after this.
Got an unused vehicle going nowhere? Donate it to the one place that can take you any place. Visit mpt.org/vehicles and support the programs you love on MPT.
The MPT app puts our programs right at your fingertips, so you can choose when to watch, what to watch, wherever you want to watch it. Download it now.
For the Political Roundtable, Charles Robinson joined by Rachel Bay of WYPR Radio. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Big hearing today, big crowd.
Minimum wage, it's been on the agenda all week long, Rachel. I think part of what we saw here was the opposing sides just going at each other.
Yeah, absolutely. This would raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour over a 5-year phase-in. And kind of the big criticism, at least coming from a lot of the Republican committee members, was how is this going to affect small businesses, especially in rural areas?
Yeah, and it pits both parts of the state against each other. So you've got the 95 corridor, and then you've got the Eastern Shore contingent, and you've got the Western Maryland. But I think the thing that was really big was the tip wage issue. You want to explain what that's about? Because they don't get $15 an hour under this current scenario, or do they?
They do. So the bill, as written, would eliminate. So right now, if you are a tipped worker, like a restaurant server, for example, your tips count toward your minimum wage calculation, and the bill would eliminate that exemption. So they would have to get $15 an hour, not including their tips.
We talked earlier in the program about the fight over Labor Day and school calendars. There are other education issues, and the governor is pursuing what he calls accountability. What's that about?
Yeah, earlier in the week, there was a hearing on a bill the governor's proposed that would create an inspector general in the Department of Education to investigate reports of fraud and abuse. They've received a lot of reports already. He created a precursor office to kind of be there to field complaints before an inspector general was actually approved. If and when the Inspector General is approved, they would have a subpoena power and be able to actually thoroughly investigate these complaints. But so far, they've already gotten a lot of complaints. They said from all over the state, including people, a lot from parents of students with special needs. But it did not. This is a bill that was in last year and failed, and it did not get a warm reception in the committee this year either.
We also talked earlier in the program about this sort of intra-democratic battle between Comptroller Francho and the legislative leadership. There's more to it this afternoon because Mr. Francho has fired a press release off at the Speaker of the House about his campaign. What's that about?
Wow, this has been a feud that's been going on. It actually surrounds small breweries versus large conglomerates. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so the legislature, a lot of legislative leadership feel that the comptroller is too closely tied to the alcohol industry and also to other industries that the comptroller's office is responsible for regulating. And so there's a bill that would prevent anyone who works for the comptroller's office, anyone, the comptroller included, and also any state elected officials from getting gifts or campaign contributions from people related to the alcohol gas and tobacco industries.
He regulates all that now, and they are going to try and pull some of that away from him.
Yes.
Right. Now, what the comptroller did was point out that the Speaker's campaign treasurer is a big player in the liquor business.
Right. He basically said, if I have to give up my ties to the alcohol industries, then Speaker Bush, you should get rid of your campaign treasurer, who happens to be a very big player in the alcohol industry. We haven't yet gotten a response from Bush's office on that, so no word on whether that's actually something that's going to occur.
And Charles, in just 10 or 15 seconds, you had a chance to speak with Senator Will Smith, who is a young member of the Senate, but in leadership, vice chair of a committee, who is in the reserves and has been given orders to ship out for active duty.
Yeah, he'll be leaving this body on March the 29th. What has been very interesting is we've noticed that a number of bills are being pushed up because Senator Smith is one of the potential deciding votes on very contentious issues. He knows that that is happening. He kind of relates that to Mike Miller and the way he does business here.
Charles Robinson, Rachel Bay. Listen to Rachel on WYPR. Thanks, everybody, for watching State Circle, and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.
TV Worth Watching is supported by the members of MPT and by...
Hello, I'm Anirban Basu, CEO of Sage Policy Group. Our economic consultancy has served clients in more than 40 states and in 6 countries, but we're proudest to call Maryland home. Join us in support of one of Maryland's great treasures, MPT.
Freedom Car, offering transportation service with professional drivers to individuals, corporations, nonprofits, colleges, and universities in Maryland since 1991. The new